Coast. It started on a Tuesday. The release paperwork had been signed on Monday. By Sunday, the raccoon was supposed to be gone. That was the part Hannah Cole had built her whole week around. Coast. Hannah was 48, a retired ER nurse who had taken up wildlife rehab 3 years after her husband passed. She was 13 weeks into the case of a juvenile raccoon her granddaughter had named Pepper. Coast. Pepper had come in with a broken jaw and no mother and weighed barely 2 pounds. He now weighed 11.5 and bit through the side of his enclosure if Hannah was even 4 minutes late with breakfast. He was ready to be released. Everyone agreed. Coast. What no one agreed about, what Hannah's daughter Renee had been arguing about with the pediatrician for 6 visits in a row, was the matter of her 4-year-old son, Hannah's grandson, Caleb. Caleb had been fussy. Caleb had been waking at night. Caleb's appetite had been off. Coast. The pediatrician had said toddler. The pediatrician had said developmental phase. The pediatrician had said you are anxious because you are a young mother and you do not have to take him to urgent care every time he cries. Coast. Renee had stopped bringing him. She had brought him to her mother's house Friday evening because she needed 2 hours of sleep. Caleb sat on the kitchen floor with the juice box and a fire truck. Pepper was in his evening enclosure in the laundry room. The release was 36 hours away. Coast. At 7:15, Pepper began to make a noise Hannah had not heard him make in 22 weeks. Coast? It was not the chitter of hunger. It was not the trill of greeting. It was a low, persistent, rising whine that did not stop when she walked into the laundry room. It did not stop when she sat down beside the enclosure. It did not stop when she opened the latch, which she never did at that hour, and reached in. Coast. Pepper climbed out of the enclosure, crossed the kitchen floor in a straight line, and stopped in front of Caleb. He sat back on his haunches. He sniffed Caleb's stomach. He sniffed it for what Hannah, who had been a nurse for 23 years, would later say was an unreasonable amount of time. Coast. Then he reached out one small black hand and pressed it flat against the front of Caleb's shirt, just below the ribcage. He held it there. Hannah watched her grandson's face. Caleb was not afraid of Pepper. He giggled. The hand stayed. Coast. She thought, in that first 10 seconds, that Pepper was confused, that the change in routine had thrown him, that a 4-year-old in his kitchen looked like a small playmate. She thought she would scoop him up and put him back. Coast. She was a wildlife rehabilitator with 11 years of experience. She knew what regression looked like. She reached for Pepper. He did not move his hand from Caleb's stomach. He looked up at her and made the whine again. She froze. Coast. Hannah was a nurse. She put her own hand on her grandson's stomach just below the ribcage, exactly where Pepper's hand was. The heat surprised her. The tightness surprised her more. She pressed gently, the lightest professional press she'd ever done in her life. And Caleb jerked away from her and started to cry. Coast. Renee was upstairs, sleeping. Hannah did not wake her. She put Caleb in the car. She drove to the emergency department where she had worked for 16 years. She told the triage nurse what had happened. The triage nurse asked her to repeat the part about the raccoon. Coast. The ultrasound was ordered at 9:11. The diagnosis came back at 9:43. Acute appendicitis, the surgical resident who came down to talk to her, said the appendix was thin and stretched and had been quietly inflamed for what he estimated conservatively was 4 days. Coast. Another 12 to 14 hours, he said. He used the phrase silent perforation. He did not finish. Coast. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Caleb came home on Tuesday. Pepper's release was delayed by 1 week. Hannah did not write down the reason. She did not need to. Coast. When Caleb walked into the laundry room with a small bandage and his slightly slower walk, Pepper climbed to the front of his enclosure. He pressed his face to the wire. Caleb sat down on the floor in front of him. They looked at each other for a long time. Pepper did not chitter. He did not whine. Coast. He sat with both small black hands flat against the wire the way he had pressed his hand against Caleb's shirt. Has your pet ever done something that made no sense? Until later, it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Coast. Hannah thought about the climbing out of the enclosure. Not regression. Detection. The pressed hand. Not confusion. Localization. The whine she had never heard. The only sound the wild animal had to make to a woman trained to hear the sounds patients make when something is wrong inside them. Coast. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Coast. Pepper was released the following Sunday at the edge of the wood behind Hannah's property. He paused at the tree line. He did not look back. Caleb watched him go from the kitchen window, one small hand pressed flat to the glass, exactly where Pepper had pressed his hand the Friday before.